So in today's video, I react to a recent TV discussion on whether COVID-19 vaccinations should be mandatory. Roll the titles.
For the record, I'm done trying to make y'all comfortable. For the record, you ain't trying to grow, then it's done for you.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. As always, just a quick reminder that I'm now offering the SIBO organic acid stool tests and consult via my website. So if you have any health or digestive problems, then consider taking these tests, as they will provide a lot of very detailed information upon which you can start making informed decisions and then start getting your health back on track. And on that bombshell, to the video. So a couple of days ago, Good Morning Britain had a discussion with some experts on whether COVID-19 vaccinations should be mandatory. This is my reaction to this conversation.
People are suggesting it should go further though, and it should be compulsory and mandatory for everyone. We're now joined by Professor Julian Savulescu from Oxford University, who says as long as the vaccine is safe, it should be compulsory to have it. Duncan Stevenson from the Royal Society for Public Health, who thinks making it mandatory could actually do more harm than good and risk a backlash against the vaccine. And Dr. Bharat Pankhania, who says as long as people are fully informed, it shouldn't need to be compulsory. Good to talk to all of you.
So two things here. So it normally takes 10 to 15 years to bring a new vaccine to market, and this will involve many steps such as preclinical stages, various phases for vaccine trials, and then a lot of analysis of data. So we should all have concerns about bringing a vaccine to market in months instead of years. Clearly, the pharmaceutical industry has a track record that at times should be heavily questioned. Just from the table that you can see on screen, since the early 2000s, the pharmaceutical industry has been fined billions and billions of pounds for poor manufacturing processes, failing to discuss safety data, and various forms of fraud. So as a bare minimum, everyone should be shining a very bright light on any such vaccine manufacturers. Now, track records aside, it doesn't mean that a safe vaccine can't be brought to market. So hypothetically, if one was brought to market, should, as Professor Julian Savulescu suggests, the COVID-19 vaccine be mandatory for everyone? So in my opinion, absolutely not, and I will explain why in a short while. Now, I tend to agree with Duncan in that forced vaccinations can do more harm than good in society, and I also agree with Bharat in that we should give the public the facts and figures to allow them to make informed decisions on any such vaccines. So with the introductions out of the way, Kate Garraway then asked Julian why he was so in favour of mandatory COVID-19 vaccines, and this is what he said.
Well, whether it's compulsory will depend on three things. Firstly, the safety and effectiveness of the vaccine, the gravity of the problem, and the safety and effectiveness of other strategies, such as a selective lockdown or voluntary vaccination.
So I understand what he is saying, and he is making very predictable opening statements here. Now, many people watching this will be extremely triggered, even with his fundamental points, as many people would say this type of argument and enforcement would be a terrible infringement of human rights, and I would absolutely agree. But in his defence, and to keep this argument balanced, there are many precedents for mandatory vaccinations. So for example, the proof of vaccination against yellow fever is a requirement of many of the world's populations when travelling to Africa and Latin America, and there is often zero widespread backlash or objection to this. Having said that, when organisations or people like Professor Savulescu try to convince people over the benefits of mandatory vaccinations when people are already very anxious about COVID-19, then the scientific evidence and literature is fairly clear in that people will become more suspicious, and this will drive a lot of conspiracy theories.
But given what we've been told, that 500,000 people would have died, and we're told that 200,000 have died from lockdown, it's an extremely grave situation. And if the vaccine is safe, it's like putting on a seatbelt. Seatbelts are mandatory. They reduce mortality by 50%, and they sometimes kill the occupant or cause serious injuries. But because they're so safe and the problem is so serious, we make them compulsory.
So I do understand his logic here, but comparing COVID-19 vaccinations to wearing a seatbelt is ridiculous and an oversimplification of an extremely complicated topic. Seatbelts become mandatory in many countries after extensive research and many, many years worth of data that showed the use of seatbelts outweighed the risks. So yes, there are some who may be harmed by wearing seatbelts, such as spinal damage or rupturing their spleens, but generally speaking, the benefits outweigh the risks. And clearly, there are not too many people who oppose mandatory seatbelt wearing. For COVID-19 vaccinations, on the other hand, there are many moving parts to the puzzle that, in my opinion, would make it impossible to enforce mandatory vaccination. Unlike seatbelts, there is no extensive data or literature to support the efficacy of a vaccine, and also for seatbelts, you are simply requesting a person pull a polyester belt across themselves. With enforced vaccines, you are eroding and infringing on a person's human rights, and you are demanding they put an unknown entity into their body, or a largely unknown entity after such short trials.
I have lots of response to this morning. Yesterday, it was a very positive response from our viewers when we said, would you volunteer to be tested? However, the idea of making it mandatory has changed the tone of it specifically. And I think one of the concerns, and this is a concern that I know lots of people have, this is for you, Professor Savulescu, has come from Janet on Twitter. She said, I've lived long enough to see vaccines go wrong. It's too fast for my liking, so it's a no for me. Everyone should be able to make up their mind about their own body. And the whole process has been very, very quick. Admittedly, there's been lots of funding has been put here to try and find these vaccines quickly. But the speed of which it's come about will be concerning to some people, like Janet, who has seen some vaccines in the past go wrong.
Yes, I absolutely agree with this. We know from lots of studies that there are people harmed from vaccines, and there are many, many other people harmed from other medications. Therefore, in my opinion, we should not be rushing into anything like this until at least we know that the virus is not going to organically disappear, say after the next 6 months or so.
Yeah, fair enough. I agree with that concern, and we've never had a successful vaccine against the coronavirus. So the safety is a real issue, and we should be having a good hard look at that. But this is a different situation where large numbers of people are dying, both from the virus and also the strategy. What people don't realise is that we're going to have a large number of cancer deaths over many years because of delayed treatment. Already the estimates are 200,000 people will die. So, the costs of going slow are also significant, and that has to be balanced in this case.
That is a very valid argument the professor puts forward there, and this is why it's such an incredibly complicated topic. So does doing nothing with financial impacts and the loss of life from various other diseases such as cancer dwarf the loss of life from inaction to COVID-19? One thing that I would say is that the data in all of these areas appears to be all over the place, so I don't think we are anywhere near being informed enough to make those calls.
Yes, I think the comparison with seatbelts is an interesting one, and I think the reason that we kind of are less inclined and think that compulsory vaccination should be a last resort is that it would be difficult to enforce. When you're wearing a seatbelt, you're in a car, you're driving around. If you're not wearing it, you'll be stopped and pulled over. If you're not vaccinated, what is the enforcement? What is the penalty that is levied on people who don't get a vaccination? And where we've seen mandatory vaccination in the past, the penalties can be regressive in nature. So it could be stopping people's benefits, or it could be not allowing them to attend school or the workplace.
So with tensions as high as what they are, try and enforce those type of sanctions on people and watch what happens. The riots would be akin to something that we've never seen before. And again, it's just something else where the poorest people in society will suffer the most.
And that regressive nature tends to disproportionately affect those people who already have poor health and are facing health inequality. So
But there might be some people that would argue that actually, if you're not vaccinated, then, you haven't got the right to go to school because you're potentially putting others at risk, or you haven't got the right to go to work. There would be people that would argue that.
Yes, there would be people who would argue that, but those people can never have that argument legitimately until the vaccine is proven beyond all reasonable doubts to be safe, or that the virus is simply going to peter out on its own over the next 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think the second reason is that it's not just about the enforcement, but it's about the way that we do this. We know that there is a sizable minority of people who are probably vaccine hesitant when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccination because it's new, but we need to better understand them and work with them. The most effective vaccination programs are by consent, not by compulsion.
Yes, I would absolutely agree with that last statement. However, I think his first statement, in that only a minority of people would be adverse to vaccinations, is very questionable. I simply don't believe that there are just a minority with concerns over these vaccinations.
Dr. Pancania, one of your concerns as well is, as we were listening to Kate Bingham talk about the fact that people would get it first would be the vulnerable, those who have underlying health conditions, but also those from the BAME communities, because there's been a high prevalence of them suffering from COVID. You have concerns with that as a sort of a starting point for this, don't you?
My concerns are that we should profile all at-risk people, and having identified the at-risk population, we determine that they will be offered the vaccine before others.
Yes, I think that's a very sensible approach. You identify the most at risk and who would potentially benefit from the vaccine, and then you give them the information and you let them make their own call.
Let's talk to Dr. Sarah Jarvis, who's in the studio with us as well. Sarah, Ella Rose makes an interesting point on Facebook. She says, forcing people to have vaccines is the first step to taking people's rights away. I am vaccinated. However, it's my freedom of choice, and I'll fight to keep my freedom of choice. There is a fear that people feel like if they're being forced into this vaccine, is there something we don't know about it? Surely the way Duncan's describing it, let people understand exactly why it's going to benefit them in the community, is a much better way of going.
I couldn't agree more, and I would much, much prefer to go down that route. One of the things we need to bear in mind, though, is that vaccination is not just for us, it's for other people. So as a doctor, there is no way that I would ever suggest to somebody that they needed to have chemotherapy or surgery that I knew would save their life. If they were competent to consent, mentally competent to consent, then of course they have a right to refuse anything, even if it might kill them.
Again, I absolutely agree there. The point at which you dictate to someone that they must take an unproven vaccine will be a very sad day.
The big difference we've got here, of course, is that this isn't just you, it's a bigger picture. We've done the most amazing thing during lockdown as a society. We've all put ourselves in really challenging situations. A lot of people have given up an enormous amount, not because they were likely to get ill, but because they knew that we needed to protect the most vulnerable. And that's
It's a different situation, though, isn't it, Dr. Jarvis? That's the difference. It's a different situation. There's one thing, however difficult and however devastating it might be to put yourself financially at risk, to inconvenience yourself, to perhaps give yourself mental health challenges. And I guess another thing, to think, well, I'm putting something in my body that I don't 100% feel confident about.
This would be the main point of my argument here. There would just not be anywhere near enough due diligence on a COVID vaccine. On screen now, you will see a list of some of the most significant withdrawn drugs to date. All of these went through years of trials only to be found to cause significant harm and loss of life. And these were relatively small populations of people who took these medications. So it would not be ethical, in my opinion, to roll out a vaccine based on such limited knowledge and data to many millions of people around the world. So that's the end of today's video. I hope you all enjoyed. And as always, remember to look after your body because it's the only place you have to live. And I'll see you next time.